Professor Martin's also the president of the International Philosophers for Peace group. And this is how I met Glen, when I gave a talk to that group in Radford, Virginia, Radford College. And I suggested to them that as philosophers, they had the standing, since philosophers determine what is knowledge in theory, they had the standing to decertify economics as a science, pending better definition and more respect for the facts. And the philosophers were laughing in the aisles when I simply described what the economists do informally. But without any further ado, please welcome Professor Glen Martin. His talk is titled, he may have expected me to censor this, but we don't censor it. Violence and economics in today's world disorder, transforming the global system to one of peace and prosperity.
Thank you. Thank you, Stephen. And before I begin, I'd just like to say that the person here around whom we're all gathered and who has worked so hard for years now is Stephen himself. And I think we owe him a round of appreciation for all the work he's done. I don't know why he keeps inviting me back. Things I say challenge some of the most fundamental premises that I hear expressed repeatedly in these conferences, although I'm a very big supporter of monetary reform in this country, and I support this bill that we're all working on. Perhaps it's because I'm a philosopher and not an economist, and therefore what I say probably doesn't cut much water. Maybe that's why he has me back.
No, we like you.
I want to begin by just outlining three premises which I take very seriously as a philosopher. The three premises are here. The first one, and this has come up in this conference a few times, the idea of morality. In my investigations as a philosopher, in some of my articles, I see a direct connection between morality, not popular morality, but morality in the most fundamental sense, and our being human beings. We're all human beings. We all, therefore, are different than things, right? Things can be bought and sold. Things can be destroyed if you own them. Things can be manipulated and commodified, but not human beings. And every one of us, of the 6 billion of us on this planet, is a human being. And I think it's very important that we realize that this fact puts us in a moral relationship with every other person on the planet. I travel a lot. I go someplace. I land. The people may have a different skin color, a different culture, but they're human beings, and it's instantly apparent that I'm in a moral relationship with them. Okay, that's the first point that I would like to make here. Secondly, point we've heard from several speakers, we're on spaceship Earth here. It's not a big place. You can get halfway around the world in a day. And we've got to begin thinking in planetary terms. This has become so apparent since 1961, when those first space photographs of the Earth, that beautiful blue little planet floating in the blackness of space, began to come back from us, from those astronauts. And I don't think it has sunk in to the majority of the Earth's population yet. That we're on a tiny little fragile ecosystem called the Earth, and it's rapidly being destroyed in all kinds of ways. We're threatening our very existence on this planet. That's my second premise. Third premise is democracy. Democracy is not just one political system among other systems. Democracy is the way that we're morally related to one another. Right? To advocate democracy is to say that every single person is morally equal, politically equal to everybody else, and everybody has a right to say. Everybody has human rights, and so on. And I think that the way we divide ourselves up in the world and chop up our world destroy the possibility of democracy. If we're on a spaceship Earth and we're all morally related to one another, we need to democratize the world that we live in. And I want to suggest, this isn't original with me, of course, there's a lot of writers who have talked about this, that the most basic form, pervasive form of violence in our world today is structural violence. If you define violence as one group A benefiting from a relationship with another group B that group B would not have chosen for itself, and group B has no possibility of changing this relationship because of law, because of police, because of economic institutions and so on, then you're in a condition of structural violence. Half the world lives on less than $2 a day. These figures vary a little bit from authority to authority, but basically these are the standard figures. 1.3 billion people live on less than $1 a day. That is a living hell. I know some of those people. I've been with them in Togo and other places on this earth. It is hell. They don't like it, they're not happy about it, and they have no choice. Partly because they're trapped in a prison that is called their nation state. They can't get out. No one wants them. They're poor people. And therefore, Nicaragua becomes a prison for the people of Nicaragua, from which we benefit, a relationship that we benefit from. And Togo becomes a prison for the people of Togo, from which we benefit. So, I know we're familiar with many of these things, but I just want to go over some of the most basic. The GDP of the poorest 48 nations is less than the wealth of the world's 3 richest people. Something very, very wrong. The richest 1% of the world's people have a wealth equal to the bottom 50% of humankind. And the richest 10%, that's us, right? We control 85% of the planet's wealth. Something very, very wrong with this. And if we fix the economic system in the United States, that does not exhaust our responsibility. The world is a nightmare, and we're morally related to everybody on this planet. I think I went too far here. So, global institutionalized violence. The most fundamental form of violence in the world today is not the violence of militarized nation states, although that's the second most prominent form. It's structural violence, the systematic and legally enforced impoverishment of the majority of humankind. Central to this system of violence is the system of autonomous nation states in conjunction with the global economic system. They work together. There's a number of studies on the relationship between nation states and global capitalism. Both came out of the Renaissance from the medieval feudal order, which was very different both economically and politically. They evolved in tandem with one another, and the system in many of these studies, James Petrus and Christopher Chase Dunn and so on, found that the ruling classes, the most powerful classes in the nation state, have worked for all these centuries in tandem with the political and military power of these nation states to draw the wealth of the world, to control the wealth-producing process of the world and draw it to these wealthy classes. They couldn't have done it without the nation states, without the governments of the nation states. And that's what's still going on today. So anyway, you can read various philosophers throughout who have written about the world system. Immanuel Kant, Baruch Spinoza, Thomas Hobbes, John Locke have characterized the world system as a war system. John Locke calls it a state of nature, which he doesn't identify exactly with a war system, but Kant called it a war system. Why is it a war system? Because the fundamental relationship that is institutionalized nonviolence is democracy, is people relating to one another as citizens protected by law who have equal rights, equal freedoms, and so on. But the relationship between sovereign nation states, autonomous nation states, is not democracy. Never has been. And the United Nations, as you may know, in its charter, it says this is an organization devoted to the preservation of the sovereign independence of its member states. Sovereignty in this dialogue, in this political dialogue, means autonomy internally, right? Completely autonomous over their internal affairs, and externally. No one tells them what to do. That's violence, that's war. In that situation, you can never trust your neighbor, right? You don't know whether your neighbor is going to be equal to you or not, because if your neighbor has more power or more influence, they may colonize you. In that situation, you never know whether your neighbor will attack you. It's the antithesis of democracy and the institutionalization of violence. There's a lot of literature on this, but I just wanted to give you one quote. This is from Jürgen Moltmann, a very prominent European theologian. He says there are political and economic structures which are unjust because they are used to enforce the domination of human beings over human beings, the exploitation of human beings by human beings, and the alienation of human beings from one another. Within these structures, violence is practiced not directly and personally, but indirectly, by way of laws and prices. Through structures of this kind, violence is legitimated. Through them, violent death is spread. Today, impoverishment, death, and exploitation spread misery, disease, and epidemics, and hence premature death among the weakest of the weak in the third world. The mass death of children in Africa is just the beginning. There, the number of people dying a violent death through structural violence is greater than the number of soldiers killed by military violence in the Great World Wars. Our world system is inherently violent. That's my contention. So the system of sovereign nation states is fundamental to this. And the ideology of free trade that was so well commented on by our last couple of speakers, this ideology of globalization and the idea that we must globalize is covering up a system which has nothing to do with freedom, nothing to do with free trade on an equitable basis among people who are supporting a real economy and real production and so on. It is a system designed to draw the wealth-producing process to the great centers of economic power of the world. Corporations, as we've also seen, I think, earlier, they're legal persons with rights to privacy and all other rights, and the freedom to buy and sell as they see fit. And they're legally bound to maximize profits for investors, regardless of the consequences to society, the environment, or persons. The quotation at the bottom is by Ellen Brown here, who is in the audience here. It's from her book. And she talks about the totalitarian nature of corporations themselves, where a tiny group who know what's going on, who know what the investments are and so on, who direct everything below them, a kind of army of workers who only do what they're told because they're afraid of losing their jobs or whatever. They direct this army of workers to produce in the service of this tiny elite who are only interested in self-interest and the interest of certain investors. So this world system involves world trade, international banking, and it's a totalitarian system, and it's getting worse, getting more serious. Vandana Shiva, who's written a great deal about this, and studied it, says that it involves the dispossession of 80% of the planet's population. Partly because of a definition, Shiva says, of the production boundary. Right? In World Trade Organization calculations and economics, they're defining the production boundary as production within nations that is traded on the international markets. These are stipulative definitions that come out of nowhere. And what this does in the economic calculations of the World Trade Organization is dispossess the labor and the production of everything that goes on internally within nations in which people produce through subsistence farming or whatever other means, produce for themselves and trade locally. It's an intentional system. The rules of world trade are forcing nations to convert to export and import. When I was in Togo, one of the times I was in Togo in 2003, I met with the cotton minister for the Togo government. He's in charge of growing cotton. Now, all these nations in the third world are forced to pay off their international debts by trading on the world market because they need convertible currencies. These debts have to be paid off. They can't be paid off in Togolese cedis. They have to be paid off in dollars. And he told me, the cotton minister of Togo told me that they can't grow the crop and sell it on the world market and recover even the cost of growing it. They lose money in just growing it, but they're forced to do this because they need the dollars. So they're getting poorer and poorer every year because of this relationship. And as you know, the IMF and the World Bank impose structural adjustment programs on weak nations, which opens up, which privatizes everything. It gets rid of their public assets and puts them on the auction block to private corporations, multinational corporations that are colonizing the world. The internal resources of these nations are becoming the private property. And private property takes on a meaning larger than the laws of any third world nation, right? This sacrosanct thing. Oh, we have private property within your country. You cannot touch that. We do what we want with it. And what they want to do with it is to benefit investors that have nothing to do with the country that's hosting these assets. Under World Trade Organization rules, corporations can now sue governments. And therefore, the one authority that can control corporate greed, and the one authority that can regulate corporations is now subject to being sued by corporations. It's a gigantic inversion of anything that has to do with democracy and the rule of law. Most of the global money supply, as we know here, is controlled by private banking. So this military empire is centered today in the United States. At one time it was Spain colonizing the world, Portugal colonizing the world, France, Great Britain, but since the Second World War, the center of the global empire is the United States. And the mass media propaganda characterized resistance to this system, whether internally within the United States or externally, as some form of wild terrorism or communism, some form of something evil that's trying to subvert freedom. The mass media is owned by those same corporations, General Electric and so on, that are making money from this militarized system of domination. Governments, and this is literally true, are being redefined as security forces for multinational investors. All over the world, when people rebel, when people object, when people protest, pressure is put on these governments. Even the Indian government has gone along with this. After Kentucky Fried Chicken was attacked in Mumbai by chicken farmers who are losing their livelihood to Kentucky Fried Chicken, which is underselling them in Mumbai, they attacked the outlets. India began training its police to protect multinational corporate outlets. India has no control over its international trade policies, no control over structural adjustment, no control over how its World Bank loans are dealt with. The only thing it now controls is security, and the security is now in the service of the international corporate system. The U.S. trains military forces from some 80 countries in counterinsurgency warfare. This is not an accident. Right? This is part of the fact that the U.S. military, as years ago, General Smedley Butler said, the U.S. military is but an enforcer for the global corporations. The U.S. has invaded dozens of countries and overthrown dozens of others. And here's a quotation just to remind us from Michael Parente, his book, Against Empire. U.S. leaders profess a dedication to democracy, yet over the past 5 decades, democratically elected reformist governments, in Guatemala, Guyana, the Dominican Republic, Brazil, Chile, Uruguay, Syria, Indonesia under Sukarno, Greece, Argentina, Bolivia, Haiti, and numerous other governments were overthrown by pro-capitalist militaries that were funded and aided by the U.S. national security state. The U.S. national security state has participated in covert actions against proxy military war or proxy military wars against revolutionary governments in Cuba, Angola, Mozambique, Ethiopia, Portugal, Nicaragua, Cambodia, East Timor, Western Sahara, and elsewhere, usually with dreadful devastation and loss of life for indigenous populations. Hostile actions have also been directed against reformist governments in Egypt, Lebanon, Peru, Iran, Syria, Zaire, Jamaica, South Yemen, the Fiji Islands, and elsewhere. Since World War II, U.S. forces have directly invaded or launched aerial attacks against Vietnam, the Dominican Republic, North Korea, Laos, Cambodia, Lebanon, Grenada, Panama, Libya, Iraq, Yugoslavia, Afghanistan, and Somalia. This can't be an accident. You know, they don't sit in the Pentagon and say, oh, today let's invade Syria. Right? It's part of a planned and systematic strategy connected with those 737 military bases around the world, a planned and systematic strategy of world domination. And this is, I want to argue, This is not because of evil presidents in the United States or evil people in the Pentagon. This is because of a global system of nation states in conjunction with a global economic system that inevitably institutionalizes this kind of thing. So we've got this problem, and the problem involves sovereign nation states, not just the transnational corporations and the global bankers. In world systems theory, which is a prominent sociological theory, Manuel Wallerstein and Thomas Shannon and others say the world is organized this way. Right? The global imperial centers of capital are militarized, high-tech, wealthy, and they're resource poor compared to the resource-rich nations in the global south. And then there's a semi-periphery of less high-tech nations, but the periphery, the global periphery, the vast majority of people on this planet, they're low-tech, weak, poor countries, and their cheap labor and cheap resources are extorted from them through debt, structural adjustment, military control, and so on. It's a system of domination, right? There's an economic relationship between the center and the periphery. So I would like to argue on the basis of these facts and these premises that I started with, that all three features of the world system make democracy impossible. Militarized nation states subvert democracy in the name of security and secrecy, both within and externally. Right? We have someone mentioned the black budget. Right? Someone mentioned this secret government that the United States has had for decades. What the people do in the United States is not going to make a difference unless that secret government is abolished. And how do we abolish it? Because they assassinate people like John F. Kennedy and Martin Luther King and the rest. Capitalism in general. Do we need economic freedom? Yes, people should be able to buy and sell. People should be economically free. But if you make your framework the idea that all human economic interactions are premised on self-interest, which is one of the fundamental definitions of capitalism, then you're going to lead to a nightmare. That's what we've gotten in this world, a nightmare 5 centuries old, where people say, you know, the Adam Smith framework, if you let everybody be greedy as they want, if you let everybody indulge in self-interest, and you set up institutions of self-interest, then somehow miraculously there'll be an invisible hand which creates the greatest good of the greatest number. That's just nonsense. That's insane. So the central monopolies that make possible the common good must be in the democratic hands of the people. Control over global economics and the power to eliminate militarism must be in the hands of the people. So I advocate democratic socialism. I think we should not be afraid, despite the media propaganda, we should not be afraid of the S word. Because socialism means a society which organizes itself institutionally on the basis of the value of human beings. Socialism means that there's something recognized about human beings that has to be there as a foundational premise for society, and then you talk about how to do economics and how to do market and so on. And that's what I take as implicit in Michael Luntley. He's a philosopher. This is from his 1990 book. He says socialism is not a moral theory which offers a particular version of the good life. That's up to people to decide that. But instead is it a theory about how the good life is possible. In short, it is a theory about the conditions necessary for creating a society in which our lives are shaped by moral values. because you're starting with human beings and the value of human beings. Rather than a society in which our moral traditions have been erased by forces inimical to the moral life. And part of this theory about the conditions necessary for the good life provides the leading critical edge of socialism. That part is the claim that it is capitalism which has been largely responsible for the destruction of the conditions necessary for the good life. Because capitalism destroys, if that's the sole framework, it destroys morality. I mean, we see this over and over. People become cynical, human beings are commodified, global prostitution, global drugs, global sale of human beings, children, human organs, the rest of it. Because if that's the fundamental framework, the institutional framework, the fact that we're all valuable in ourselves is superseded, is disintegrated by commodification. So we need planetary democracy. It's only possible under democratic socialism, free of the rule of an oligarchy by the rich. Today, this can only mean planetary socialism under a non-military Earth Federation. We must democratize the nation-state system, the global monetary system, the private property system, and the global corporate system. Hence, we need an Earth Federation that demilitarizes the world. As long as you have nations, autonomous sovereign nations, you're going to have a militarized world. It socializes essential resources and utilities of the earth for the benefit of the people of the earth, common good. It issues debt-free public currency for the earth, and it deals with global crises beyond the scope of nation states. There's a growing and a vast literature about this. This doesn't just come from my organizations that I work with. These crises that the world is facing in the last few decades are beyond the scope of the nation states to deal with. They can make treaties, but a treaty like the Kyoto Accords in Japan, a environmental treaty, is voluntary. Voluntary treaties mean some nations are not going to do it. And we're facing these crises, militarism and wars, with weapons that can wipe out the human race and create nuclear winter. Global human rights violations. If we're morally related to everyone on the planet, then we're responsible in some way for these horrible things that are going on today in Burma and other places. Global poverty and misery. Again, I understand that as violence, and it's a violence to which we're related. We benefit from that violence against them. The depletion of natural resources, agricultural land disappearing very rapidly, fresh water disappearing from the planet, and global climate crisis. And there's no global coordination. Right? The nation states don't coordinate and can't coordinate because they're all sovereign, autonomous nation states structured around self-interest. That's what it means to be autonomous. I have the good fortune of knowing Dr. John Cairns Jr., who is an internationally known environmentalist. And he says, I see him almost once a week, he says, he no longer talks about sustainability. He says it's meaningless to talk about sustainability, sustainable development, or anything else, because the climate crisis is in collapse. The planetary ecosystem is in a state of collapse, and until it re-stabilizes, until we know what the parameters will be of rainfall and forests and atmospheric content and so on, you can't discuss what sustainability is. And he says there's many economists, like he refers to Dr. Jim Hansen of NASA, who are saying the same thing. Well, this is the organization that I work with. In 1958, They founded the World Constitution and Parliament Association, and they said the world needs democracy. The world needs a constitution. And they met in 4 constituent assemblies. 1968 in Innsbruck, Austria, 77 again in Europe, in Colombo, Sri Lanka in 79, and then finally in Troy, Portugal in 1991. Thousands of world citizens, international lawyers, dialogued for these 32 years about the Constitution, and they came up with a document that's on the back table there that is it's incredible. I've looked at many constitutions, and I think it's the groundwork for a real new world order, a global democracy. What the Constitution does is create an Earth Federation, which in a federation, as you know, the United States is a federation, right? A federation of states within a federal government. A federation means there are many levels of autonomy. From the local city or town, you have a government, right? And then it has a larger framework. In the case of the United States, it's a state. And you have a larger framework, which is a nation state, right? And we're talking just simply about federating the earth. We're not abolishing nations. We're federating the earth so that everybody has the same playing field, the same human rights, the same protections. So the Article 1 of the Constitution gives these 5 responsibilities of the Earth Federation: to prevent war and secure disarmament. There's no nation on Earth that can do this, right? None. Even the most powerful nation. How would the United States get secure disarmament worldwide if it wanted to, which it will never want to? To protect universal human rights and equal opportunities in life. No nation, again, or group of nations could do this. To obtain for all people equitable economic and social development. To regulate world trade, currency, and the resources for the common good. No group of nations. If we do monetary reform in this country, it'll be a big step forward, but no group of nations could possibly do that for the world. Not sovereign nations. Only if they federate. To protect the global environment and the ecological fabric of life from all sources of damage. The global environment is going down the toilet as we speak. It's collapsing, and the nation states are helpless in the face of this. And to solve any unforeseen future problems that transcend national boundaries. Now these, as you see at the top, they're a mirror of the 6 global crises that I just mentioned, right? The 6 global crises that are beyond the capacity of nation states are mirrored in the broad functions of the Earth Federation. So we've held a World Parliament, 10 sessions, elaborating this Constitution. The Constitution is creates an Earth Federation which is itself non-military. It's Article 2, and disarms all the nations of the world. It deals with the global crises beyond the scope of nation states. It nationalizes or regulates key resources and utilities for the common good. Not all nations have resources, right? But everybody on Earth is a human being, and they have the right to live. It nationalizes the global monetary system into debt-free Earth currency and credit. And this is literally, these people that wrote it, I wasn't one of them, but this is what it says in, got to finish, yeah, okay. This is what it says in the Earth Constitution, G1F. Pursuant to specific legislation enacted by the World Parliament and in conjunction with the planetary banking system, this is the World Financial Administration as part of the Constitution, to establish and implement the procedures of a planetary monetary and credit system based upon useful, productive capacity and performance in goods and services. The money will be based on productive capacity, not debt. Such a monetary and credit system shall be designed for use with the planetary banking system for the financing of the activities and projects of the world government and for all other financial purposes approved for by the World Parliament, without requiring the payment of interest on bonds, investments, or other claims to financial ownership of debt. This is how it is possible. If 25 nations come together and establish the Earth Federation, they will be a government. They don't have to be rich nations. They can be the poorest nations on Earth. But that government can start issuing money on the basis of their productive capacity instantly and transforming this horrible world system that we live in. So I'll stop there. Thank you very much.